Hey guys, welcome back to part 3. So I have a small correction from last time. I said Aspies for Freedom and Autistic Pride Day were started by two straight cisgender autistic people. I was wrong. I used the dead name of Gwen Nelson, who is a trans woman pictured here. So the concept of Autistic Pride was in fact started by LGBT autistic people. There are other problems I have with Aspies for Freedom, as I highlighted in the last video, but I also strive to be as accurate as possible in delivering this information to you. So now on to the main topics of this video. In the year 2004, a Canadian autistic researcher known as Michelle Dawson spoke at an event known as Auton. Michelle is interested in ethics and researchers doing ethical work. She does not consider herself part of the neurodiversity movement, though some of her work does align with the movement. The Supreme Court decision ruled that the Canadian government does not have to pay for autism treatments, which mainly included ABA. Her speech was called "The Misbehavior of Behaviorists," and it really highlighted the way behaviorists, particularly ABA providers, acted in ways that would be considered unethical in other fields of research. I think it's very thorough and really digs deep into the rhetoric they present and the way they gather the supposed evidence that ABA works. It's a great introductory reading for people who are unfamiliar with the controversy surrounding ABA. Many parents were upset about this because they saw ABA as medically necessary and were worried what their autistic kids would do without it. It's been 17 years since then, and I don't know for sure how they ended up without being an ABA, but I do think an autistic person can live just fine without ABA and is even better off without it. Now, I do think there is danger in getting rid of ABA with no other services in its place, because after all, autism is a disability, so some kind of service provision is necessary. However, said service provision should be of good quality and not abusive. And ABA as a practice is inherently abusive, in my opinion. ABA does what many non autistic people assume is good for autistic people, so it's seen as the best option, even though many autistic people think it's one of the worst. I don't know all the specifics since I don't live in Canada, but I do know that funding for ABA is not what it's like in the US, at least yet. There there's even a whole movement led by parents called Autism Doesn't End at Ford, where parents are begging for the Canadian government to mandate insurance coverage of ABA. I don't think these parents know what they're really asking for. In the US, all 50 states now have a mandate for ABA coverage. I don't think that's a good thing, especially since there are services I think are much more appropriate that do not get the same level of coverage. They're seen as too experimental. And of course, the people who lobbied for it are mainly parents and professionals. Dawson's essay was quite a breakthrough in criticism of ABA from autistic people, and I think it opened the floodgate for autistic people's opposition to ABA to become more visible. That by no means is to say that it was the first, but it was pretty significant. I think the most important criticisms of ABA come from people who went through it. Um, I'm not sure whether Dawson ever did or not, but personal accounts are out there, and I think they need to be centered more than they are. A guy named Lenny Schaeffer wrote a response to Dawson's essay. This is known as the Schaeffer Report. He was a proponent of ABA. It contained a lot of typical pro ABA arguments, such as some autistic people are really disabled, and this is the only thing that'll work for them. And you advocates aren't truly autistic. He specifically said that the autistic people advocating against ABA had Asperger's, clearly a stand in for high functioning. Well, autistic people responded in droves to this, tearing apart his arguments. A lot of these responses are on autistics.org. Mel's response in particular centers the experience of autistic people that Schaefer and others consider too low functioning to have an opinion, as Mel herself had high support needs. Mel really hit home the point that saying, oh, well, if they don't learn to be more normal, they'll risk institutionalization, is not a good argument. Mel said it better than I ever could. When people tell me that I am hurting the chances of the girl in the institution by fighting for her rights, then they are hurting her because she is me, and she already had to go through the recommended behavioral treatments and drugs. I am the one stuck with the aftermath, just as many other autistic adults are, and many autistic children will be. Nobody is advocating stagnation. We are advocating true learning and true growth that takes the whole person, including the autism that will always be there, into account. We have seen it, so we know it exists. So, I've talked about them a few times before, but now is the time they really enter the ring. And they made quite an entrance too. Before this, there were many autism organizations led by parents and professionals. Most autism organizations were and still are. But when this organization was founded, it amplified everything by 100. The organization is, of course, Autism Speaks. In 2005, Autism Speaks was started by Suzanne and Bob Wright after their grandson was diagnosed with autism. They thought it was tragic that their grandson, who they saw as a healthy, happy little boy, suddenly regressing and losing skills he was developing. Now, I'm not sure how much truth there is to that story and how much of it's a spin, but either way, they were a wealthy family with many friends in high places and were able to drum up enough sympathy to start a large autism charity with more reach and power than anything that had come before it. Bob Wright used a lot of his connections from NBC to build a coalition. This is a man who helped get Donald Trump on The Apprentice, so he was clearly well connected with other wealthy people with a lot of influence. Before then, the Autism Societies of America and Canada were kind of the main opposition to the neurodiversity movement, as well as Cure Autism Now and Defeat Autism Now. But then this organization splashed onto the autism scene, and nothing was ever the same again. Bernie Marcus, the former CEO of Home Depot, gave the Wrights a modest donation of $25 million to start their organization. Many organizations are lucky to even see a sliver of that amount in revenue. Because of this, and because of how much money they pocket from donations, Autism Speaks has long had the nickname Autism $Speaks, shortened often to $. I personally like calling them that. Their mission was pretty clear. They saw autism as an epidemic, and they wanted to find a cure for it. Autism Speaks wanted to be the final autism organization, but they also really wanted to be as widespread as possible. To this end, they absorbed three pre existing autism organizations: Cure Autism Now, National Alliance of Autism Research, and the Autism Coalition for Research. It was pretty clear from the beginning that this was going to be a huge organization that would be hard, if not impossible, to ignore. As you've seen, there was plenty of opposition to CAN from autistic people, so now they were becoming part of something even bigger. So the opposition largely shifted towards Autism Speaks. Autism Speaks wasted no time in what they were planning on doing. Soon enough, many different ads that portrayed autism as this frightening monster and autistic people as these cursed children who desperately needed saving. In 2006, they premiered a documentary called Autism Every at the Sundance Film Festival that showed autistic children having meltdowns and appearing to be in distress. It also showed their parents talking about their struggles in raising their autistic children. It later came out that ahead of filming for this documentary, the autistic kids were made to purposefully look malnourished, and their meltdowns were intentionally triggered as a way to elicit fear and a sense of urgency from viewers so that they would be more likely to donate to the cause. The most infamous scene, however, involved then Vice President Allison Singer talking about how the lack of services for her daughter Jody made her contemplate driving off the Washington Bridge with Jody in the car with her. She said her non autistic daughter was probably the only reason why she didn't do it. Jody was in the room while this was being said, as if Jody had no way of understanding what other people were saying about her. Singer later wrote an apology for her comments, though it doesn't read to me like she's really sorry, and she continues to take positions against the neurodiversity movement to this day. To put it lightly, autistic people found this to be a harmful documentary that did not portray autism accurately nor respectfully. Autistic people were furious that this organization existed. How dare they? How are they going to counter an organization of this size and reach when they were largely outnumbered? Well, there have been a number of methods used in the 16 years since Autism Speaks was founded. Autism Speaks has been compared to many organizations, some of these comparisons I think being a stretch, particularly the KKK. But I do think there is an organization very much like them that is older called the Muscular Dystrophy Association, aka the MDA. The MDA is known for hosting telethons that show kids with disabilities in a way that elicits pity and in an effort to raise money for a cure. The MDA telethons had tons of reach and celebrity endorsements, though the actual subject of said telethons, nicknamed Jerry's Kids, due to the host being popular entertainer Jerry Lewis for many years, grew up to resent the organization. Kevin Hart hosted an MDA telethon last year, I guess because everything from the 20th century needs a reboot or remake, though MDA telethons are nowhere near as common as they used to be, though similar causes are commonplace. So many autistic people and autistic groups were not happy with Autism Speaks. However, there was one in particular that saw a middle ground with them. Global and Regional Asperger Syndrome Partnership, or GRASP for short. They are an autistic led nonprofit that have been around since 2003. They were, however, very divisive for a few reasons, the most consistent one being their centrism on a lot of issues. Their director, Michael John Carley, sought to compromise with Autism Speaks. This resulted in a series of articles put out by members of both GRASP and Autism Speaks, known as the Articles of Understanding. Many autistic advocates did not think this was a good idea, but GRASP went ahead and did it anyway. In these articles, which were hosted on the Autism Speaks website, they talked about what was meant by cure to try to come to some mutual understanding. They basically said that they meant cure as in for people who are more low functioning, once again showing autistic people with high support needs and intellectual disabilities being thrown under the bus, not just by organizations that are hostile towards autistic people in general, but also from other autistic people. This isn't the only problem with GRASP. Look at the Asperger syndrome in their name, for example, but it was pretty egregious, and many in the community did not take this lightly. These are some emails from Yahoo Groups. Shout out to the archive team and Yahoo Groups Fandom Rescue Project for supplying me with these. That showed how many autistic people in advocacy spaces found this decision from GRASP appalling. Mel's email on the right is referring to getting the truth out, which I believe I mentioned in the last chapter, and we'll probably talk more about in a future video. So now we're at an impasse. The neurodiversity movement gained some traction by then, but not nearly enough to counter what was developing with Autism Speaks. A&I was great, though they were not policy focused, and neither were any of the other groups in the United States, which meant that there was no autistic led organization present in the lawmaking room. GRASP was autistic led, but was misrepresenting the opinions of a lot of autistic people, deciding to take a moderate political stance. Autism was about to become more well known, though it was from the perspective that it was a horrible disease comparable to AIDS or cancer potentially caused by vaccines. Within the greater disability rights movement, there was very little representation of autistic and neurodivergent people. It was largely dominated by people with physical disabilities and still is. So it was time to start a new organization that suited all of these unmet needs. This isn't to say no autistic people were part of the greater movement already. There were already some autistic activists involved in the disability rights movement, such as Cal Montgomery on the left here and Anita Cameron on the right. Their work was mostly with ADAPT and the independent living movement, though Cal was also involved with A&I. As you can see here, this is a response to the GRASP controversy, and it was actually an email Ari Naaman accidentally sent to Autistic Spectrum Treehouse. I'm glad he did, though, because it's an important piece of history. This is him talking about starting a different nonprofit. So, what was that nonprofit? The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, or ASAN for short. Ari Naaman, along with Scott Robertson, started it in 2006, so they are now 15 years old. This is their old logo, so not the rainbow wheel they use now. From the start, it was clear that this organization's mission was to increase visibility of autism in the disability rights movement, and that has been their main objective ever since founding. They adopted Nothing About Us Without Us as their slogan from the disability rights movement, which was also used in South African apartheid protests and Hungarian labor organizing before then. They started out as an all volunteer organization. I like the way their current director, Julia Bascom, described it in her 2019 gala speech, which I had the pleasure of hearing in person. We were a handful of people, in a few different states with laptops, what we call a grassroots organization. But we knew what our community needed, and we were willing to work to the bone to get us there. It took a while for ASAN to grow into what it is today, but I think it was clear from the start that they were going to get there. Ari is exceptional at networking and knew exactly where he was going to take his organization from the beginning. He cultivated relationships with other social justice organizations and used his connections wisely. Now, ASAN didn't become a nonprofit until 2011 when they opened their offices in Washington, D.C., but they were certainly present for those 5 years beforehand. ASAN had some activity in its first year, and they were still laying out a lot of the groundwork. This is what really put them on the map, though. The New York University's Child Study Center put out a series of ads portraying mental disabilities, all of which fall under the neurodiversity umbrella as thieves. Thieves that take children hostage. They were framed as ransom notes. This included autism, and ASAN decided to counter this with a protest. Ari emailed several listservs connected to the NYU Child Study Center as well as their board of directors and got many other people to do the same. They got people from ADAPT and other disability organizations to assist them. They initially responded by doubling down on their campaign, though self advocates pushed harder after that. Then, on December 19th, 2007, which happened to be my 10th birthday, the ads were officially pulled. This incident is the pinnacle of nothing about us without us. It means that nothing related to disability should be done without the meaningful involvement of people with disabilities. And if it isn't, then the people directly affected by it will have something to say about it. Joseph F. Cross wrote a paper for the Disability Studies Quarterly Journal that describes this campaign as the moment the neurodiversity movement came of age. I think this is an appropriate descriptor. It was the event that put ASAN on the map, forged new relationships from other sectors of the disability rights movement, and it also was the most visibility that the neurodiversity movement had at that point. It took them about 15 years of meeting in online forums and at conferences, and now they were organizing and getting stuff done. This was a pretty big turning point. Even though organizations like Autism Speaks were getting out there and always had more reach than the grassroots ever could, autistic organizing was growing to counter it. I've talked a lot in this chapter about things that I don't like or disagree with to an extent. And this is by no means to say any of this is above criticism either, but I must say I am very impressed with what ASAN accomplished here, and a lot of the work they continue to do. In advocacy and activism, not everything is going to land or be successful. More often than not, it won't. However, there is a clear pattern in what makes advocacy successful, and I think the ransom notes campaign demonstrates this. There is a clear ask, a clear win condition, a clear strategy, and a network of people willing to participate. That is how stuff gets done. And with that, I will leave you with this poster made by Bev Harp. This was made for the ransom notes. It's styled after a wanted poster. Wanted. Kidnapping is a federal offense. The ransom notes campaign is a moral offense. The NYU Child Study Center, we let them know we're offended. This was their reply. The strong response to this campaign is evidence that our approach is working. Dr. Kopelwicz calls this a dialogue. I call it a slap in the face. Stigma hurts everyone. Stop the ransom notes campaign. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time to talk more about blogs.